There's a kind of suffering in this world that leaves no physical wound, no visible scar, and no dramatic rupture. It is the quiet ache of being unseen. For many people over the age of 60, this is not merely a psychological issue, but a spiritual exile, a deep sense that their voice no longer carries weight, that their presence no longer shifts the room, that their name is slowly being erased from the ledger of relevance. And it happens not in a single moment, but through 1,000 small acts of being overlooked. This invisible grief festers not because they've lost their desire to be present, but because they sense the world no longer wishes them to be. Our culture, obsessed with youth, innovation, and efficiency, has subtly formed an unspoken caste system where age becomes synonymous with obsolescence. We do not articulate it outright, but we convey it in how we market products, hire leaders, design technology, and even structure church ministries. And I coquette. In a world that equates speed with value, those who move more slowly, speak more reflectively, and carry time-tested wisdom rather than trending sound bites are dismissed as behind the times. And so many elders begin to internalize this narrative. Perhaps I've become a shadow in a world chasing the sun. Imagine the pain of offering a thought at a family table, only to be interrupted or ignored. Picture the loneliness of walking into a room and being politely smiled at, but never truly engaged. This is the cross many seniors carry, not abandonment in the dramatic sense, but a daily diminishment of their visibility. To feel invisible is not simply to be alone. It is to feel unnecessary, as though your life has drifted from center stage into the wings, where the spotlight no longer falls and the script no longer calls your name. And yet, biblically speaking, those who seem forgotten by society are often chosen by God for his most profound revelations. Abraham was well into old age when God gave him a new name and a new promise. Simeon and Anna, aged prophets in the temple, were among the first to recognize the infant Christ. In the logic of the gospel, visibility in the world's eyes is not the same as visibility in God's. But still, the ache remains, because we were created not merely to be noticed, but to be known, heard, and valued within a living community. Many people over 60 do not wish to be the center of attention. They long only to be received as persons of ongoing worth. What they offer is not novelty but depth, not noise but gravitas, not trend but testimony. Their stories are not nostalgic indulgences but sacred scrolls written by the hand of providence. But when these stories fall on disinterested ears or are deemed irrelevant to today's challenges, the elders slowly begin to close the book themselves. They grow quiet, not from lack of opinion, but from lack of invitation. The tragedy is not simply that they are silenced, but that we, the younger, lose what only they can give. The loss is mutual. Our communities become thinner, more brittle, and less rooted in the moral memory of what came before. A society that fails to hear its elders becomes a culture with no elders, and in time, no memory. And when memory dies, identity fades with it. That is the silent cost of invisibility. It is not only the elder who suffers, it is the entire body that forgets its soul. Yet there remains a sacred calling for the elderly, even in the face of feeling unseen. Like monks in the desert, their witness may be hidden, but it is not wasted. Their prayers form invisible scaffolding. Their patience holds together families too busy to notice. Their presence at church, their words of encouragement to a grandchild, their faithful endurance, these are sacraments of hidden grace. The world may not applaud, but heaven is attentive. To those over 60 who feel invisible, you are not forgotten. You are the burning bush that still speaks. You are the silent lighthouse guiding younger ships home. Even if the crowd no longer listens, the shepherd still does. And through him, your voice can still echo, not in noise but in eternity. There is a kind of grief that does not arrive all at once like a tidal wave, but instead accumulates slowly, like falling ash from a long burning fire. For many people over the age of 60, grief is not a single event to be named and navigated, but a lifelong companion that lingers quietly in the background. It is the grief of many small goodbyes, some spoken, some silent, some mourned, some merely buried. These unprocessed sorrows are not simply memories. They are weights, often hidden beneath a composed exterior, and in time they begin to reshape how one sees the world, others, and even oneself. When society thinks of grief, it often imagines funeral scenes or the loss of a spouse. But the grief of elders goes far beyond death. It includes the slow erosion of physical strength, the fading of memory, the relinquishing of careers once filled with purpose, and the loneliness of watching peers disappear one by one. It's the silent pain of no longer being needed in the way one once was. It's the heartbreak of sitting in a home that once rang with children's laughter, now echoing with silence. These are not dramatic losses, but their subtlety is precisely what makes them so dangerous. Because they are not named, they are not healed. Modern culture urges people to move on, to stay positive, to keep busy, but the soul cannot be rushed through its sorrow. And many older people were raised in a time when emotions were not explored, but endured. They learn to keep their heads down and carry on, but what happens when carrying on requires one to walk through years of heartbreak without ever setting the burden down? Quite. Eventually the spirit grows weary, not from a single blow, but from the accumulated sorrow that was never offered the dignity of mourning. This unprocessed grief often leads to a kind of emotional withdrawal. The elderly person begins to retreat from social spaces, not because they don't love people, but because every conversation risks brushing against an open wound. A question as simple as "How are you?" can awaken memories they don't have the energy to revisit. So instead of risking that discomfort, they choose silence. They choose solitude. But this solitude is not peace. It is a protective shell. And inside that shell, grief sits untouched and unresolved. The spiritual tragedy of unprocessed grief is that it clouds the present and dims the future. When the heart has not been allowed to mourn what was lost, it struggles to receive what still remains. God may offer new blessings, new relationships, even new purposes, but they arrive at a door that is barricaded by sorrow. The soul becomes like a house with all the windows shut, not because there is no light outside, but because the person within cannot bear to look. And yet, Scripture reveals that grief, when brought into the presence of God, becomes holy ground. Blessed are those who mourn, says Christ, not because mourning is pleasant, but because it draws the mourner into divine intimacy. The shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept, is not a small detail. It is a profound theological statement that God Himself enters into our grief. He does not rush it, and He does not shame it. He weeps with us, beside us, until we are ready to stand again. But the weeping must be allowed to happen. The grief must be named. Only then can healing begin. For those over 60 carrying years of unspoken sorrow, it is not too late. It is not too late. There is still room at the altar for your grief. The Lord is not looking for your composure. He is waiting for your tears, and through those tears He will bring resurrection. The grief you carry does not disqualify you from joy. It is, paradoxically, the very soil in which new joy can be planted. God does not bypass the wound. He enters it and transforms it from within. So do not be ashamed of your grief. Speak it, pray it, bring it into the light. For in the end, grief is not merely a sign of what you've lost. It's proof that you loved deeply, lived fully, and were woven into a story far bigger than your own. And in the hands of the Redeemer, that story is never over. There is a fear that often nestles into the hearts of those who have lived long, a fear not of death, nor even of suffering, but of becoming a burden to the ones they love. This fear is rarely spoken aloud, but it is deeply felt. It hides behind polite refusals of help, behind soft chuckles that mask fatigue, behind the quiet withdrawal from spaces where assistance might be needed. For many over the age of 60, this fear is not a mere insecurity, it is a theological, an existential wound. For those who once provided strength, guidance, and support, the idea of now being the one who needs, rather than gives, feels like a diminishment of dignity. This fear stems in part from the culture in which they have lived and moved. The modern world prizes independence above all else. We speak of a self-made success, of a doing it on your own, of never needing anyone. Dependency is portrayed as weakness, and so as bodies slow down and memories falter, the elder feels they are failing the cultural ideal. What once earned them respect, competence, self-sufficiency, productivity, is now slipping away, and without these anchors, many wonder, what am I worth now? But this line of thinking is not just unkind, it is untrue. It is based on the distorted modern belief that human value lies in utility. Why is in utility? That if you cannot do, you are not worthy of belonging. Yet in the Christian vision of the human person, worth is never earned by doing, it is bestowed by being. Every person, regardless of strength or weakness, is made in the image of God. And more than that, Scripture insists that the weaker members of the body are to be treated with greater honor, not less. The elderly are not burdens. They are treasures wrapped in fragility. Still, the fear persists, not because it is reasonable, but because it is deeply human. For many elders, the worry is not simply about being helped. It is about being pitied, patronized, or resented. They do not want to impose. They want to be loved, not managed. They fear the silent irritation in their children's eyes, the rushed tone in the nurse's voice, the hushed conversations about what to do with dad. And so, in an effort to preserve dignity, they shrink. They decline invitations. They hide their pain. They retreat, not because they want to be alone, but because they fear being a weight others are forced to carry. But here lies the sacred paradox. To allow yourself to be loved in weakness is not to be a burden. It is to offer others the chance to become more fully human. When the elderly allow others to care for them, they are not subtracting value. They are inviting transformation. The child who lifts their parent in old age is drawn into a deeper compassion. The caregiver who listens patiently is sanctified by their sacrifice. In this divine economy, the one who receives care gives just as much grace as the one who provides it. We must also remember that Christ himself became a burden, willingly. He entered the world as an infant needing to be fed and held. He died a criminal's death, unable to carry his own cross to Calvary. And in these moments of ultimate dependence, he did not lose glory. He revealed it. The God who became weak has sanctified weakness. He has turned burden into blessing. So when an elderly person fears becoming a burden, we must remind them, you are not a weight. We carry you as Christ carries the cross, not with resentment, but with reverence. The fear of being a burden can only be healed in a community that values presence over performance. A family, a church, a society must echo the voice of God that says, even to your old age and gray hairs, I am he who will sustain you. We must become places where elders are not merely accommodated, but celebrated, where their wisdom is welcomed, their stories are honored, and their needs are met not with sighs, but with songs of service. To those over 60 who fear they are in the way, hear this. You are not an inconvenience. You are a living icon of perseverance. You are not a liability. You are a sacred legacy. You are not falling behind. You are being carried forward by the love you once gave, now returning to you in the hands of others. And in receiving that love, you bless us all. There comes a point in life when the soul begins to crave more than words. It longs for weight. For many people over 60, the appetite for small talk, empty pleasantries, and hurried exchanges begins to fade, not out of cynicism, but because the soul has endured too much to settle for shallowness. They have loved and lost, labored and suffered, hoped and grieved. Their hearts have been shaped by decades of lived theology. So when they enter a room and hear conversations revolving endlessly around trivialities, whether forecasts, celebrity gossip, or surface-level opinions, they often retreat into silence, not because they are bored, but because their spirit is quietly hungering for something true. To reach old age is to have seen life in all its paradoxes, joy and pain, gain and loss, rising and falling, laughter and mourning. It is to have stood at gravesides and cradled newborns, often within the same year. In light of such experiences, the soul naturally gravitates toward conversations that carry eternal significance. Discussions about virtue, meaning legacy, forgiveness, beauty, suffering, and God, these are the topics that resonate. These are the things that matter. And yet, such conversations are increasingly rare in a society shaped by distraction and efficiency. The old do not disdain speech. They simply hunger for speech that matters.